Fighting among Libyan militias kills 16 near the Tripoli airport. How open source medical tech is making life easier for diabetics. And the latest gadgets to make your home smarter. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Fierce fighting between militants and government forces at Libya's only international airport killed 20 people and left more than 60 others wounded. Monday's standoff shut down Mitige Airport in Tripoli for most of the day. It is unclear when flights will fully resume. Libya's internationally recognized government says armed militants attacked the airport, where more than 2,500 people are jailed for various crimes. The government says militants were attempting to free terrorists belonging to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda organizations and other groups. No one has claimed responsibility for the airport attack. It is also unclear exactly who was killed or wounded in Monday's fighting. 7 North African migrants have died trying to reach Spain's Canary Islands from Morocco in a small inflatable boat. Spanish authorities say a rescue crew found 5 of the men dead in the boat drifting off Bastion Beach on Lanzarote Island, about 130 kilometers from the Moroccan coastline. Authorities received an emergency call around midday, alerting them to the drifting boat and found the 5 dead bodies inside. 2 other men died trying to swim for the coast. Medics were unable to resuscitate them. 20 other migrants were treated for various stages of hypothermia, while several were transferred to hospitals. The number of migrants arriving in Spain by sea from North Africa doubled in 2017 from the year before, as thousands try to flee conflict in Africa and the Middle East. Now, for more on the migrant situation in Spain, journalist Martin Roberts joins me live via Skype from Madrid. Robert, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for calling me.
Yeah. Now, first, you know, many times we don't really cover this Morocco-Spain migration. Tell us, how is the situation there as compared, say, to the Libya-Italy situation, which we cover more often?
Well, first of all, I think I'd like to say that Spanish public opinion, at least, is very sympathetic. And indeed, I think there have been moves saying that, you know, the government here is not actually doing enough. There's been a lot of criticism that the government hasn't taken enough anything like its quota, you know, on a related issue of, say, Syrian, you know, war refugees. And I think in general, I think compared to other countries in Europe, I mean, xenophobia isn't an issue. It's not a party political issue. People are very supportive, and indeed.
We're running into trouble there, but I hope the line gets a bit clear. In terms of the preferences of these migrants, are there many who really want to come and stay in Spain, or are they trying to do the same thing they do with Italy? They just want to kind of get there, step onto European soil and move on?
Well, I think it's quite clear that Spain is a very accessible way of getting into Europe, because at the closest point, the two, you know, Spain and Morocco are only 9 miles apart. You know, in fact, if you stand on the southern Spanish coast, you can see Morocco very, very easily. You can even see the streetlights. And I think it's clear that, you know, once people get through the refugee camps and they get some sort of a status, then yes, they do tend to head towards the wealthier countries in Northern Europe. But that said, a lot do actually stay in Spain, and a lot do actually find work here.
The famous, you know, development there was the wall, the fence rather, which makes it a little difficult for people to cross over. How is that viewed generally in terms of the Spanish welcoming of especially people in distress?
Well, today, the Spanish authorities actually blocked the wall at Ceuta. That's a Spanish enclave in Morocco, because 200 people tried to rush it. But there's a disconnect here between public opinion and the authorities, because a lot of media and a lot, you know, public opinion refer to that as the wall of shame. On the other hand, the authorities are, you know, are clamping down on it. So there's a difference of an opinion there.
Sure, nobody wants walls or fences. Martin, thank you very much for your reporting. And that's journalist Martin Roberts is reporting live via Skype from Madrid in Spain. Now, 2017 was the 12th consecutive year of decline in global freedom, as according to Freedom House's annual Freedom in the World report. While experts say China, Russia and North Korea, among other countries, put global stability at increased risk, there are signs of progress and global development across other regions, including Latin America and Africa. VOA's Elizabeth Chanoff reports.
Democracy in decline and under assault from nearly every corner of the world. That's according to a new Freedom House report that tracks civil liberties and other democratic freedoms across countries. Arch Puddington is a Freedom House scholar.
For the 12th consecutive year, freedom was on the decline across the globe. And by that we mean that there are more countries, in this case, in the case of 2017, many more countries that showed declines in freedom than showed improvements.
That includes the United States, where an ongoing probe into Russian meddling in the 2016 election has weakened the country's status as a model for democracy. Russia's disinformation campaigns throughout European elections were also cited as a factor in undermining democratic norms worldwide. In countries like China, experts see a pattern of intensifying repression and censorship under the country's leader, Xi Jinping. The mass exodus of Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar's Rakhine State into Bangladesh highlights a worsening humanitarian crisis amounting to what many, including the U.S., are calling ethnic cleansing. Following the ouster of Zimbabwe's president, Robert Mugabe, experts expressed cautious optimism for the country's political future.
Zimbabwe declined in our scores for 2017, but this was largely due to the fact that President Mugabe was pushed out by non-democratic means, and he was succeeded through non-democratic means. We do hope that some of the promises that have been made of reform and liberalization and serious democratic elections over the next year, we hope that these promises are fulfilled.
There's signs of progress across South and Central America, including in Mexico, where voters will elect a new president this year.
One of the candidates in that election has a populist background, and if he were to win, there might be some interesting changes in Mexico's policies.
Despite ongoing wars in both countries, Freedom House experts say they'll also be watching Iraq and Afghanistan's elections this year for signs of further progress toward a civilian government. And in the shadow of neighboring countries China and North Korea, experts see continued signs of political development for South Korea and Taiwan.
The fact that you've had democratically elected governments that are willing to push through political reforms is something that's a positive as well.
Elizabeth Cherneff, VOA News, Washington.
While Kenya's main opposition leader Raila Odinga has reiterated he will be sworn in as the nation's alternative president on January the 30th, the opposition coalition NASA had planned to publicly inaugurate Odinga at a rally on Kenya's Independence Day, December the 12th, 2017, but postponed. Odinga boycotted a repeat election held on October 26, 2017, in which incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta was declared the winner. The United States has urged opposition leaders to work within the law and avoid actions like the proposed inauguration ceremony. In an interview with the Voice of America in Nairobi, Mr. Odinga on Thursday said he is open for dialogue with President Uhuru Kenyatta to resolve what he termed a crisis brought about by the bangled elections.
We have said we are ready for dialogue, and we have actually proposed agenda for dialogue, which is a 5-point agenda. Number one, we talked about electoral justice. Number two, we talked of ensuring judicial independence. Number three is the police reforms. Number four is restructuring and strengthening of devolution. And finally, number five is the restructuring of the executive structure in the Constitution.
Well, Odinga said while the government could introduce other issues to the talks, the opposition's agenda for swearing in is not negotiable. Kenya's Attorney General has warned that swearing in an alternative president of Kenya would be an act of treason. Now, Cape Town, South Africa, is less than 90 days away from running out of water. After 3 years of unprecedented drought, it could become the first major city in the world to run out of water. City authorities are working to avoid what they call day zero. That's the date taps are due to run dry. They are racing to deliver additional water through boreholes, desalination and recycling. If those efforts fail, day zero could come as soon as April 22nd. Taps will be turned off and residents will have to line up at 200 checkpoints across the city to collect daily water allotments, with police and military monitoring the situation. Cape Town is a major tourism hub on the continent, receiving about 1.5 million visitors every year. Authorities say travelers should be prepared to conserve water during their stay. Now, South Korea's Samsung Electronics accounts for over half of the mobile phones and televisions sold in Africa. Now, the market for Samsung products is driven by growing African demand for bigger TV and mobile phone screens. Now, the electronics giant says it plans to double the annual revenue contributions from its African markets to 20% of the firm's global total in the next 5 years. Samsung plans to set up shops and other retail channels in more African countries and cut product delivery times. The company says an increase in connectivity across the continent, helped by higher investment in the telecommunications infrastructure, will boost demand for devices in future. Telecom executives say more African consumers are turning to smartphones, helped by faster internet speeds to use social media and banking applications. Samsung's rivals in Africa include China's Huawei Technologies and Tecno, owned by Hong Kong's Transsion Holdings. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, how homemade tech is making life easier for diabetics. Stay with us.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages, all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
Joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Medu. What do you have for us today, Lino?
Hello, Vincent. Well, clinical trials are a critical step in the development of drugs, but medical experts say problems with patient recruitment and enrollment are the primary causes for missing clinical trial timelines. They say successful recruitment of patients is one of the most challenging aspects in conducting randomized controlled trials, and inadequate patient retention during the conduct of the trial affects conclusive results. In a study conducted by Indian researchers and published on the U.S. National Institute of Health website, participants were requested to give their opinion on the barriers of recruitment and retention of trial subjects. Reasons including lack of awareness about clinical trials in patients, complexity of study protocol, and social and cultural issues related to trial participation. Joining us in the studio for more on the subject is Dana Don-Saif, a founder and chairman of the board of Lazarus Cancer Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving patient access to cancer clinical trials. Ms. Don-Saif, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lynn.
I know I can say your last name. I don't know why I keep.
That's okay.
I'm overthinking your last name for some reason. Listen, clinical trials are so important when it comes to not only drugs but also other medicine. Tell us about some of the main barriers. I mentioned some of them during my introduction, but from your perspective and your experience, what can you tell us? What do people tell us very often?
Well, first of all, a patient needs to know that clinical trials exist before they can make a decision as to whether or not they want to participate in one. So a big part of our work is helping patients identify what their opportunities for clinical trials are. Secondly, if a patient decides they want to participate in a clinical trial, and if they're accepted into a trial, in many cases they just simply can't afford the out-of-pocket expenses associated with the trial because they've been fighting cancer for so long and they just have so many medical bills. So they start to make decisions about whether or not they can participate in a trial based on the size of their checkbook or how much money they have in the bank. So Lazarus Cancer Foundation exists to support those individuals based on a financial application and help them get where they need to be and when they need to be there so they don't have to worry about those costs. And then we also have cultural issues, historical issues, language barriers, socioeconomic challenges, and also the fact that, you know, in a patient's journey with cancer, if they have failed what's available to them and they're only given 3 or 4 months to live, they really don't want to be alone and they don't want to go to a strange place by themselves. And so they don't want to leave their support network and their support structure.
And there's also the uncertainty when it comes to clinical trials, because it is a trial, you don't know what the end result will be.
Yes.
So is that also a factor that can perhaps discourage many people?
It is, and it's important for patients who are considering participating in a trial to understand, you know, what a trial is and what a trial is not. However, for a cancer patient, if that patient has failed what's currently available to them, they really have no other choice. Their choices are going to hospice, which is totally fine, and it's important if that's what they choose to do. But the alternative to hospice at that point in their journey is to participate in a clinical trial. So it's important that they're given that opportunity.
To what extent do we see a disparity between men versus women, perhaps Asian population versus Black population versus Caucasian? Tell us in terms of that issue.
So overall, only 5% of eligible patients actually participate in clinical trials. And if you dissect the population of clinical trial participants, less than 5% of those are from minority communities combined.
Oh, wow.
So it's a huge disparity.
Yes, it is.
And it's an issue because we need to be developing technology, medicines, treatments, and cures for all segments of our population, not just white men, who are those who predominantly participate in clinical trials right now.
That's a good point. Now, what would you like to see change that could get perhaps more people involved in clinical trials?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that need to change. I think we need to do a lot of community outreach and engagement, not just with the patient community, but with the medical professional community. But I think the biggest thing that would bring huge change is to actually include covering the out-of-pocket expenses for patients as part of the clinical trial process and protocol.
Dina Dornsife, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lenore.
And that was Dina Dornsife. She is founder and chairman of the board of Lazarus Cancer Foundation. Now, for type 1 diabetic patients, their disease requires them to constantly monitor their blood sugar. Now, some of them are creating some homemade tech to help monitor their status. VOA's Kevin Enox reports.
Dana Lewis has been dealing with diabetes since her diagnosis with the insulin-destroying disease as a child. She constantly monitors her blood sugar levels, and when they get too high or too low, an alarm warns her to take action. But that was not working for Lewis.
In my case, because I'm such a good sleeper, I didn't wake up to those alarms. And so my blood sugar would just keep rising and rising and rising, or keep dropping. And it's more risky in the short term for the blood sugar to drop. And because I live by myself, if I were to continue to sleep through the alarms and my blood sugar kept dropping, there's some bad outcomes that can happen, which include going into a coma.
Wanting to avoid that, Lewis, along with some other software developers, hacked into her glucose monitor to improve the alarm. Then she wrote an algorithm that does most of the work she was doing herself.
Information comes in from each of the medical devices to a computer. It runs the math itself, and then it says, okay, take action. And it's able to close the loop by sending those commands back to the insulin pump to make the insulin dosing adjustment.
Hacking into a potentially life-saving medical device clearly is not recommended, but Lewis and other people who suffer from diabetes, a disease that destroys the ability to process sugar, say they were tired of waiting for health agencies to get new tech on the market.
When we first started on this project, diabetes tech was taking around 4 to 5 years to go through FDA approvals to get into the hands and have it be commercialized and get into the hands of type 1 diabetics.
So Lewis posted her algorithm on the web and allowed anyone to work on her code and make improvements, a process called open source coding. That decision has already resulted in improvements, like making the system compatible with smartphones and watches.
We have a lot we can still do in terms of optimizing the hardware and also optimizing the software and the algorithms that we're able to use. I've been able to switch from having to bolus for meals and give myself a certain amount of insulin for meals, and now being able to say just, I'm eating, please dose my insulin for me.
An estimated 415 million people around the world suffer from type 1 diabetes. Kevin Enox, VOA News.
And that's our health report for today, so stay in touch for more. Find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, and thank you very much for joining us today, Lenore. Now, be sure to watch for Lenore Moudou every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa, right here on Africa 54. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, the latest addition to the Internet of Things. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Meet the car wink. It's a display that shows emojis that are sent via Bluetooth from people's phones. The idea is simple. It lets users display emojis to communicate with other drivers and to warn of traffic situations ahead, such as a pedestrian crossing. The device, made by California-based Innovert Designs, has raised over $100,000 in crowdfunding and will go into production this year. There are no frowning faces or middle finger emojis. The idea is to make people smile on the road. One XType, it looks like something straight out of the Harry Potter books. This is the square of a chessboard made by Indian startup Invention Technologies. The board moves the pieces by using magnetics, and it connects to a smartphone and app via Bluetooth. The company is currently running a crowdfunding campaign and hopes to be able to ship the first games this year. Once it becomes available on the mass market, it will cost about $300 US. Well, and finally, tech startup Titanium Falcon has taken the wraps off its new motion controller, the Talon Ring. The Ring can control video games on multiple gaming platforms. It allows granular controls in video games for acceleration, positioning, and other controllable parameters. Apart from video game control, the Ring can be used to control smart home devices. Another feature is the ability to remotely trigger a camera on a smartphone. The Talon Ring will sell for $129 when it ships later this year. And that's what's trending today. Now, here in the United States, a man in Frederick in the state of Maryland is living his dream. Wheeler Stone, who is known by Dark Stone, is creating leather costumes and accessories for people who love to dress up as fictional characters from movies. He's also designing and making various leather products for everyday life. This report by Faiza El Masri is narrated by Faith Lapidus.
Doc Stone can spend hours working in his studio without getting tired or bored. To him, leatherworking is more of a hobby than a job. Around 3 years ago, he quit his job as an emergency room nurse to become a maker.
It's a risk, and the biggest thing about life is you can fail doing something that you don't enjoy. So why not risk succeeding at something that you do enjoy?
Becoming a full-time maker gave Stone the chance to express his passion for what's called steampunk.
It is a retro Victorian reality that if you had seen the rise of steam-powered and brass and that kind of aesthetic instead of the more industrial, gas-powered engine thing.
You're tighter on this side than that side, so you can give me some slack on that side.
Steampunk performer Inger Talbot dresses as Xena, the fictional character that first appeared in the 1990s on the TV show Xena Warrior Princess.
The chest, shoulder, and back piece are the licensed armor from the show.
Go ahead and pull it all the way out. Perfect.
Artist Stone helps her customize the rest of her costume.
That is actually a sheath for my sword so that I can be walking around and have it on my back as opposed to carrying it around and, possibly impaling people.
Steampunk or contemporary, the process of leather making is basically the same. It starts with putting the design on paper.
But then I take, piece of paper, cut it out, and pattern it around that and make sure that all the folds work, and then from there you go and you cut leather.
The next step is to dye it. Here, as in every other part of the process, Stone has developed his own style, and he prides himself on being a completely self-taught artist. Then he sews the pieces together and turns the design into a tangible product. He's recently launched an online retail store where he sells various high-end, handmade products.
I have a 3D printer, I have a computer. There are leather artists who use lasers to cut out their stuff. So I think if anything, it's about integrating. Computers are tools, and just as the same as my sewing machine. But it would still be me throwing the finishing touches on.
Leather artisan Doc Stone says that's what gives his products a distinctive spirit and personality, and gives him the pleasure he couldn't find at any job other than maker. For writer Faiza El-Masri, I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
I think that's rather cool. And that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Today's episode won't cost you anything.
Freebie.
Let's see what this one is about.
Anna, I love my job.
Oh yeah? Why is that?
I get so many freebies from the bands I write about. CDs, t-shirts, water bottles, even tickets to see them perform.
Wow. The only freebie I ever got from my